part of the Earglue Media family of podcasts.
You're listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies.
Welcome to Petticoats and Poppies, History Girls at the Movies. We're your hosts, Maggie and
Nicole. So, a period drama starring Adam Driver. Maggie and I obviously had to cover this one. The Last Duel is one of my favorite films of 2021 and also definitely my biggest surprise of the year. I actually even read the nonfiction book by Eric Jagger that the film is based on, so it felt like it made sense for us to talk about it, put my having read it to good use, and I had to get Maggie to watch it somehow.
It really was a clever way to make me finally watch it.
Right? It was pure manipulation on my part. I will say, trigger warning for sexual assault. The film contains a couple of scenes of sexual assault, and that means that it will come up in this episode as well, particularly because the historical topic that we're talking about does pertain to that. Obviously, we're not going to say anything graphic, but I did want to throw that out there and say that also sort of issue that for the film. I do think it's handled about as well as it possibly could be in the movie, but we'll get into that later, I'm sure.
Yes. So to dive right into The Last Duel, it was released in October of 2021. It was directed by Ridley Scott. It was one of his two films that came out last year. House of Gucci is another great one. The screen that's where Nicole and I differ a little bit on that one, but
sorry, I have firm beliefs that this is the, superior Ridley Scott film of 2021.
That's okay. You can have that opinion.
Yep.
So The Last Duel's screenplay was written by Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, and Nicole Holofcener. It was based on the 2004 book The Last Duel, A True Story of Trial by Combat in Medieval France by Eric Jaeger. The film stars Matt Damon, Adam Driver, Jodie Comer, Ben Affleck, and Harriet Walter. It is based on the true story of a knight who challenged his former friend after his wife accused him of raping her. It is told in 3 chapters in which we see the events leading up to the duel from the perspectives of the 3 main characters. It received very positive reviews, but unfortunately bombed at the box office and also in the award circuit, which I'm very bitter about. It is available to stream on HBO Max, and if you have DirecTV, you get HBO Max for free. So there's no excuse to not watch this.
So I was so freaking skeptical about this film when it was announced. And that's partially because it was announced before Nicole Holofcener signed on to it. So when they announced that Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, my favorite person, Matt Damon.
Your favorite. This is a really monumental episode for you.
Right? Yeah. And Ridley Scott were like, they're not 3 people I would trust to make a film about sexual assault.
No.
But I do think that, whenever they added Nicole Holofcener to the creative team and they said that she was going to be writing sort of the female perspective of it, I was like, okay, I'm willing to give it a shot. And I do kind of still question why they were like, this story, this needs made. But I really can't find fault with how they did it. I do know also that originally Ben Affleck was meant to play Jacques Legree before the role was later given to Adam Driver, and he took a different role in the film, which I think does maybe help explain why they wanted to make this movie, because Matt and Ben just wanted to play these friends who became antagonists or whatever. But I do still kind of, I'm not sure I understand why this movie exists, but I really love it. And yes, I know I am as shocked as everyone else at the fact that I love a Matt Damon movie this much. I never thought I would have a Matt Damon movie in my top 10 of the year, and yet here we are.
Really proud for you. This is character growth.
It really is. This is actually the follow-up, Maggie, to that astrology quiz thing that we took that said that Matt Damon and I were a
I wasn't going to bring that up.
I really do think actually the entire cast are great in this. But like Ben Affleck gives one of my favorite performances of the year. I don't think I've ever liked Ben Affleck in a film this much.
He does not deserve to be nominated for a Razzie.
Whatever camp thing he's doing here is actually freaking genius. Literally, that's the scene where he just tells Adam Driver, now take your pants off. That is cinema, baby.
The way he kept saying it too, like, can you please stop talking? You're like ruining the vibe, man.
Like, also Jodie Comer, one of my favorite performances of the year. I think it's a damn shame she's not nominated for the Oscar. I think Adam Driver does like really solid work in this. I think he really puts his physicality to good use in this, which sounds funny, but like I think he does a very good job of sort of acting physically menacing, but in a way that's not like too over the top. He manages to somehow feel both very like dangerous and very charming, which I think is impressive. Particularly like if you see him in interviews, I think it makes it more impressive that he's able to do this. I will say though, just to like win back a little bit of my credibility, I think Matt Damon is the weak link in this cast, but I think he's giving like a fairly decent performance, but also like brings me some joy to see Matt Damon just play like asshole husband. So, you know,
he's typecast.
Absolutely. And he typecast himself. That's my favorite part of it. Like he said, you know what role I would be great at? This one. And he was right. He was right. I love the opening to this film with them like getting dressed for the duel. I think that's brilliant. I think the fact that they're sort of having these things put upon them is really brilliant. And I love the fact that it includes Marguerite in that as well. I think, and I'm going to like get into this later, I think that one thing that's really fun about this movie is that they really do adhere to a lot of the historical accuracy, like the fact that we see at the beginning of this duel, like they're reading out the rules for the duel. And that's like a true thing that would happen. Like, I think, especially as Americans, we think of dueling as this sort of hot-headed way that you know, settle a disagreement, something of honor that's, you know, like you go across the river to New Jersey to do it type thing, because that's what it was sort of later on. And we don't really think of dueling as this sort of very regimented, very strict thing that it was in this time period, where it was like an actual legal, you know, way to solve a trial, which I think is fascinating. I'm obsessed with the structure of this film, the way that they do the chapter titles. And for anyone listening who like hasn't watched it, I guess we essentially see the same story 3 times, but told from 3 different perspectives. First, we see Jean de Carouge, Matt Damon's character. Then we see Jacques Legris, Adam Driver's character. And then we see Marguerite's, Jodie Comer's character. And what's really cool is that each time the title says the truth according to this person. But the last one then is they take away the rest of the text and it just says the truth. And I really appreciate, you know, the fact that they actually do assert that Marguerite's version of events is the truth. Because this is, and again, I'll get into this a little bit later more, but this is something where for hundreds of years, people have said that Marguerite was lying and people have said that Jacques Legris was innocent. Like Voltaire wrote a thing randomly about the fact that he thought that Jacques Legris was innocent. And now, like Eric Jagger, who wrote this book, certainly seems to favor her claims. And a lot of modern historians think that Jacques Legris was guilty of what she accused him of. And it's really nice to sort of see this put out in a way that like most people now who encounter this story will encounter it through this film, and will encounter it in a way that presupposes that she was telling the truth. And I think that that's really important in telling this story, particularly because this is still such an issue in our modern society of women not being believed when they're talking about sexual assault.
Yeah, I agree.
And I am someone who, like, I think that we show sexual assault on film way too much. Nothing bothers me in a movie more or a TV show more than whenever it's sort of shown for no real reason. But I do think that in this case, it's actually warranted, and I think it's handled very well. And I think it's very important that both times we see it occur from Jacques Legris' point of view, and then again from Marguerite's. And what I think is so brilliant about this film is the fact that even whenever we see it from Jacques Legree's point of view, you can sort of tell that you can understand why he doesn't see it as such. Like, you can see why he can honestly believe that he's innocent, but you also very clearly can see that it is assault that's happening. And I think that the way that that was handled is like really, really impressive. I also really love Alex Lothar as King Charles VI in this. Like,
I was so surprised to see him.
Right? I was like, wait, is that who I think that is? I think that he does like such an excellent job of sort of portraying this young king who, and it's true, like part of how this sort of goes forward is like, he's like, yeah, let's have a duel. Like, that sounds entertaining. And he does like a really good job of sort of showing without much sort of built into the script at all, but just sort of demonstrating the type of king that he is and how his youth has allowed for sort of these sort of things to happen. I will say my one huge qualm with this movie, it's not huge, but my one big qualm is that horse scene did not need to be in there. If you've seen it, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I was like,
I was like, I get the symbolism. I get what we're doing here. I don't need it.
It was certainly a choice.
It was a choice. I would love to know whose choice that was. Like, is Matt Damon responsible for the horse scene?
He's like, you know what this movie really needs? Some horse wang.
Like, oh God.
There's the title of the episode, Horse Wang.
No. I just want you to think about the fact that I saw this movie in theaters twice. I watched that scene once next to my mother and once next to my little sister, who is a horseback rider.
And also an adult. Like, just to like clarify, she is also an adult.
Yeah, she's an adult. She's 18. Like, so
I know, but we just need to clarify.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. She's young enough that I didn't want to watch that sitting next to her, but old enough to see this movie. Let's put it that way.
Yes, my fellow Adam Driver stan.
Yep. The duel at the end of this film is, I think, one of my favorite scenes of any movie of this entire year. Honestly, any movie thus far of this like century, maybe. I think the way that it's done is so compelling, and the tension that they build with it is honestly just like masterful. I think that this movie really is some of like, I think it's a really good example of like what Ridley Scott does really well when he's sort of on his game. Because as we all know, like Ridley Scott is not, he's one of those directors who can produce something like really good and really special and wonderful, or you can be like, oh, all right, well, that happened. But I just think the overall commentary on the plight of women, even well-born women at this time in this film, is so cutting without it ever feeling like it's preachy or like girl boss feminism or anything like that. It feels to me like true to the period, but also I think what it is that the movie doesn't stress the fact that it's relevant today. It just, unfortunately, like, you can't get past the fact that it is.
Yeah, so I took a really long time to see this movie, having literally watched it today, and just muddling my way through the discourse of the last 2 months, acting like, yeah, I totally know what's going on. So so many people were telling me like how rough, like, and terrible some of the scenes are, and they are terrible. I'm not saying they're not, but as somebody who has watched a lot of Starz, Showtime, HBO, even Netflix, gritty historical shows, I'm thinking like The White Queen or Vikings or heck, even Game of Thrones. I think that their depictions of sexual assault are far more graphic and more unnerving than this particular depiction. I felt like this felt very sanitized. Like, it's still terrible. But it definitely felt like it was packaged for a wider audience. And so in retrospect, I'm still really surprised by some of the reactions I saw on Twitter. And it does make me wonder like how many people have seen some of these other shows. Cause I remember really vividly watching The White Queen, and there's a scene in that series. And I was just like, I'm done. And I never actually finished that series.
I feel like they did it also in a way that I would imagine, just based on like how little nudity and stuff there is in the scene. I feel like and I don't know, like, I assume they had an intimacy coordinator on the film. I would hope they did.
Yeah,
but it feels like they did it in a way that was as
respectful to all parties.
Yep, as respectful and as comfortable as it could have been for
both
even like Adam Driver and Jodie Comer.
Orgy scene or whatever was geared to happen, everybody was still like mostly clothed. Like they were just down to their night things. Like you didn't really see
like there is some nudity in this, but I think the nudity always comes in the scenes that are not assault centered. Which I think is
mostly the scenes between Matt and Jodie, isn't it?
There's nudity in some of the scenes with Ben.
Oh yeah, that's true. But that's
where we see him
that's consensual.
Having his wild time. Exactly.
Yeah, that's all consensual.
Yeah. So I think that's
it's done really artistically, and I think it's disappointing that those elements and the fact that it is shockingly done with respect not only to the people that they are depicting, but also to the cast that is being tasked with depicting this horrible scene, that it's not done to sexualize or to gratify anyone. Like has been my biggest complaint with TV shows. Like, I'm so sorry. I'm sure we're going to get hate for this, but like Outlander, I've dealt with Outlander fans far too often in the way that like they very much sexualize very horrible graphic depictions of sexual assault. And like, it soured me from watching that. It soured me from watching Game of Thrones. Like as soon as I start seeing people being excited by these kind of scenes, like it makes me really uncomfortable. So in a sense, I feel like this film ultimately did achieve its goal because everybody was very uncomfortable by it, even though it is a very sanitized version of assault. And so I think, I don't know, I feel like, of course, film Twitter and just Twitter in general very much lost the nuance of it, because I think that Ridley did a tremendous job with how he created this and crafted those specific scenes. And the subtle differences between the two depictions of them and how you're seeing it from Lucrese's point of view, where he thinks he's, being the dashing Lancelot coming to, save her from a loveless marriage. And like, he sees it as foreplay the same way that he had that whole little scene with his ladies in, Ben Affleck's chambers. Like he thinks it's a game. And it's so interesting the way that you see that depiction and then the sharp contrast of Marguerite's horrifying realization of what's about to happen to her and how she is completely defenseless of it. I am glad, based off of the stuff that I read, that they didn't have, I don't know what his name is, the guy that came with Lucrece there, he didn't like hold her down or anything. Like, I'm so glad they chose not to do that. And that's why I'm like, I think that Ridley really did try to approach this with the most respect possible, because there's definitely parts of the account of the actual incident that could have made this so much more worse to sit through next to a mother or a sister or a stranger in a movie theater. Like, this could have been so much worse. The horse is still just, I would like somebody to pay for the horse scene. I literally was like, when that scene happened, I was like, why does Nicole hate me? Why is she making me watch this?
If I had to see it, so do you.
Sharing is caring, except this.
At least you saw it on a small screen. I saw that on the big screen twice.
I'm so glad I did not see that in the big screen. It was big enough. But anyways, I just I'm segue away from that. It does alarm me. I'm trying to keep a straight face here. It does alarm me the number of people who I've seen say that there's no difference between Lucrese's point of view and Marguerite's point of view. In fact, somebody told me that today. I'm so sorry if you're listening to this, but what are you thinking? It's so different. But I do wonder how much of it is just the very simple expressions that we as women and non-binary folks who, present as more femme, that we've trained ourselves to recognize not only in ourselves, but in each other. And it's those very subtle moments of panic and moments of like knowing that something isn't quite right. And like, there's even such a blatant difference between the kiss scene that I thought was so fascinating, where like, he very much sees it as like, ooh, is this a thing that's going to happen? This is exciting. And she's like, why am I being made to kiss this man? Okay, well, my husband's telling me I have to do it, so I guess I have to do it. And whoa, he is liking that a little too much. and it's so different. And like I'm so struck by how Jodie was able to craft three very different performances, because like even with her husband, his reaction to that is like it's a flash and it's over. It's such a quick moment. He doesn't recognize that it's this like moment for her to fear and a moment for him to think that something's scary to happen. I don't know. I just thought the way that all of the point of views were so different, but in subtle ways. And you have to really be watching and paying attention and understanding ultimately people. I think sometimes people miss those little cues, and it's interesting to see who thinks it's all the same and who sees it as a stark contrast. And I was so happy to finally get to be part of that conversation, because I've seen it said quite a bit. I've seen the gift sets. I've seen people really praising Jodie for her performances, but to actually see it and actually to see how different they are, but also just being like, oh, I've definitely encountered men that have made me feel that way. And like the expressions that Jodie shows are so like relatable. And then to see people be like, oh no, it's the same. And I'm like, well, that's why there's issues. The fact that you think like, it's the same.
It's genuinely concerning. I'm like,
like, I was like, okay, so you definitely miss clues. Like, very big cues.
But I do think that they do, like, all three actors do a really good job. And obviously I think that like Matt Damon is the one who kind of is mostly the same in all three, like,
because he's aloof. He's completely unaware of what's happening under his nose.
Exactly. And also he's like, even in his own account, he's a pretty like brash guy with a bad temper, like, that's just him. Whereas I do think that like Adam Driver does a very good job of having like some differences in his performance, particularly in sort of his own account versus the two others. But Jodie is playing like three different characters essentially. But I think what's so interesting is she does it in such a beautifully subtle way that you can completely see why these two men like are seeing what they're seeing from her, while what she's showing us is the truth. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, because that's ultimately where I was too. She is playing three different characters. She's playing the roles that each of these men see her as playing, and then there's the truth, which is what actually who she actually is. And it's so interesting because you get so much more of her personality and who she is and her point of view. She's just an object to be desired and lusted after. And the other two point of views, even with her husband, obviously he is not a great guy either. I mean, he really just wants a wife just to have a wife. And then his big complaint is that he didn't get all of the land he was supposed to get from her. And ultimately, it's because he has money problems too. And it's interesting how obvious it is that neither of these men are good. And even in his point of view, her husband's point of view, he sees himself as like this hero who is standing up for her honor. But in her point of view, he's cruel to her when she tells him what happens. He like just straight up awful. And then it's all about saving face for himself because it's all about his pride. He can't possibly have this guy who already took his land from him also try to take his wife. Like, of course he's going to duel him. It has nothing to do with her. He doesn't care about what's going to happen to her if he dies.
It's fascinating too, because in a way it almost, I don't know, I almost get the sense that like whenever you're watching it, there are moments, at least for me watching it, where I'm like, okay, obviously what Jacques Legris does to her is terrible and horrible. On the other hand, I think he sees her as a person more than her own husband does. Like,
even in her point of view, it felt that way.
Her husband sees her as like a possession of his, whereas like Jacques Legris sees her as a person that he does this bad thing to. Like, which is, I think, says so much about the role of women in this time period and what even a noble woman like Marguerite would have gone through, in that, even the person who in this situation like should be the good guy has like maybe a worse view of women overall in his like mindset.
And it's like, almost even worse that the one person who between these two men who seems to see her as a person is the one who does this horrible thing because he thinks that he has a right to it, because he, for some reason, because he had a horny dream, thinks that she wants him. When that's not the case, but that's what he's got in his head. Like, obviously this woman wants me. I mean, look at her husband. Of course she wants me.
Well, and I guess it does make sense too, though, that he's this like a hot shot up in the court. Like he even historically is supposedly was a womanizer, was popular with women. He was described by a lot of people to be very charming. So you can kind of see where he would just like assume that she wants him to.
Yeah.
And I think that like what it does well is without ever questioning how horrible the act that he did was, it does show us, I think, which actually goes a long way towards saying that Marguerite was right. It shows us how he believes himself to be innocent and how he can have done the physical act of what he did and still have thought that he was in the right. And I think that like it's important towards supporting her version of the truth that we see where he can go before court and say like, no, I didn't assault her.
Oh, 100%, because there's the scene, Ridley Scott did this extremely well in setting that up, because there's the weird roughhousing foreplay scene. There's him having the dream. There's like so many little plot points that go towards why his final words are, I'm innocent, because he fully believed himself to be innocent, because he just misunderstood consent cues, because, well, they didn't really exist back then, unfortunately. You know, they thought that they had the right to whatever they wanted.
And I think
I'm sure he died thinking he was completely innocent for what he did, because the patriarchy said that's okay.
Well, I also think what's really interesting is that they show us these scenes of Marguerite and Jean-Luc Rouge having sex as a married couple. And I think what we also see there is that like it's on the verge of like,
oh yeah, I mean, and then there's the whole like subplot about like, are you actually having a good time? Is that why you're not conceiving? Which then I thought was interesting with her being 6 months pregnant, and just the way there's a really clever way that like they try to cast doubts, but then also really underline that there is no reason to cast doubt. It's such a smart film, and I'm like, y'all are just hating it for no good reason.
Yep. And listen, like I was this film's biggest skeptic when they first announced it. And like I said, I still do have some questions about like why exactly Ben Affleck and Matt Damon were like, you know what story we need to tell? This one. But I think that like Ridley Scott in particular, and I also think like a lot of this is due to Nicole Holofcener's contributions to it as well. Did just a really amazing, fantastic job with this. This is the sort of film that I feel like should be taught in film classes, like 100%. In talking about perspective and, you know, things like that. I obviously I like this film quite a bit. I'll stop taking over your thoughts on the movie though.
No, I think that was pretty much all of my thoughts. I just felt like I needed to talk about those two things that I feel like have been said a lot in Twitter, and now I can say them. I have opinions. I have feelings.
I will also repeat a thing that I have said on social media, on Twitter and on Letterboxd, which is that I am a bad film critic, historian, feminist. Every time I watch this movie, and I've watched it many times, I come out of it thinking about Adam Driver's hair.
He's so beautiful. I was like, why are you so bad?
He's so pretty in it. Which does go to my agenda, which is put Adam Driver in more period dramas.
I would love it. When I was watching this, I'm like, I'm so glad that I'm almost 29 years old and I have like the wisdom of the world behind me. Because if I was like 18 right now, I'd be like, oh yeah, totally. I'm all for him. Love him. 10-10 would do. I was like,
I would be like, I could fix him.
I would, yeah. No, I literally was just like, it's a good thing my frontal cortex is completely grown.
No, I will say, I've got to get one more dunk in on Matt Damon before I start talking actual history.
Your soulmate.
My soulmate, Matt Damon. I gotta. You know, enemies to lovers this another
every time he said Marguerite, which is like what my mom's nickname is for me, I was like, no, I don't think so.
I think that Adam Driver, Jodie Comer, Harriet Walter, who's fantastic as Jean-Luc Rouge's mother, all blend into this period perfectly. The way that they say their lines, the way that they look, all of that, the way that they hold themselves, perfectly appropriate to the period. I think that because Ben Affleck is doing such a character performance, it works. And I think also like he totally disappears into this role, partially because they've got this very weird hair on him, but it really does help him sort of camouflage into this world. I will say there are moments where I'm like, Matt Damon, get out of my period dramas. I know that you've used a microwave. Like, I can see it in your face. The mullet, I don't know if you're going to talk about that later. It's a choice. It's a choice that they made. I think that he looks kind of ridiculous. I think it works for the character, but there are certain lines, and some of it's the writing, but some of it's just like the way that he speaks that felt so shockingly modern all of a sudden. There's a moment early on in his section where he's talking to Jacques Legris, and he's like, "I'm broke," and I don't know why, but it sounds so out of place in the rest of the like dialogue. I was like,
oh yeah,
who let this get by?
I'm broke. I
Like,
also go to Hofstad and get some Dunkin' Donuts later.
Right. I was like, what's happening?
Speaking of Dunkin' Donuts, though, I really would love Ben and Adam to do more movies together. And if it involves taking pants off, like I'll put down a tenner for that. I'm here.
Yeah. Every time he says that line, though, I also think of, I don't know if you've ever seen this. There was a very old video. I wish I remembered what publication it was, where for some sort of press thing, they got Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan, and I think there was somebody else with them, maybe not, I don't know, to do an escape room. And there's like a chest of drawers in the room, and there's a clue in it, and they're having to give them like hints because they can't figure it out, as you wouldn't expect the two of them to be able to. And they say something about like, it's in the drawers. And Anthony Mackie's response is to turn to Sebastian Stan and say, "Take your pants off, man." And so every time Ben Affleck says that to Adam Driver, that's what I've got in my head.
Maybe that's where they got it from.
Nothing would give me more joy than that.
Could you imagine, though?
This was inspired by Anthony Mackie. And then Jean Cruz says, "Cut the check."
I'm broke. Cut the check.
He says, "I relate to Cinderella because I'm broke, homie."
I wonder who sleeps on whose sofa.
Oh my god! No, you wait.
Who's their Tom Holland? Legris. Is it Alex Lothar? Is that their Tom Holland?
No, their Tom Holland is Matt Damon in this situation.
Their Tom Holland is Matt Damon.
I'm so sorry, Tom. That feels mean of me.
I can't believe you would say that your son is so much like his father.
His father? Yeah, I knew you were gonna say that.
You walked right into his father.
In any
like
case,
his father before him.
I'm going to talk about Jean Cruz now. I'm going to give a little biography of each of these people. Jean Cruz was born in the 1330s in Normandy, in France. We don't know exactly when. He's a French knight. He basically is only remembered by history because he had this duel. That kind of goes for everyone in this story, though, to be honest. None of them ever really did anything else that was, worth. That sounds mean, like to say like worth remembering, but like genuinely, I don't know that we would even really know of Marguerite's existence if it weren't for this duel. Jean de Carouge was described as having a bad temper, being really rash, sort of hard to get along with, but a really good soldier. And he first married, as it mentions in the film, Jeanne de Tilly, who is the daughter of the Lord Chambois, in 1371. They had a son, and his friend Jacques Legris was the godfather of his firstborn son. And that, at the time in particular, was considered like a really high honor, and it meant that you really trusted this person a lot. He and Jacques had been friends as young men, and that friendship really lasts until Count Pierre II of d'Alençon sort of passes over Carouge for a bunch of things, really, really makes Legris like an important man in his court, and Carouge comes to resent Legris for that. But Jeanne and their son both die in 1378. It's not certain what of, but something, natural causes, some sort of illness. And Carouge goes off to war to try to earn some money and like forget what's happening to him. He returns in 1380, and like we see in the film, he marries Marguerite de Thibouville. I'll talk more about her in a bit. And he really does have this falling out with Count Pierre over these lands that he believes should have been his. And he believed that Jacques Legris had encouraged Pierre not to give them to him. And hence there's this falling out. They do reconcile briefly in 1384. They actually do have this meeting in, at a mutual friend's celebration for them having had a child. And this whole thing about like Carouge telling Marguerite to kiss Jacques Legris on the cheek and whatever is true. That happened based on records of the time. And this reconciliation between them doesn't last for very long, though. Carouge does go join the Scots in northern England during the Anglo-Scots Wars. He's given a knighthood upon his return. At some point, it's not recorded what it's about. It's not recorded exactly when it happens, but there is an angry conversation that happens between Legris and Carouge, and they become rivals again. I'm going to kind of gloss over the duel, but he and Marguerite have a son right before the duel occurs, and they go on to have 2 more children over the 3 years following the duel. What's interesting about that is that they've been married for several years, as we see in the film, before the duel occurs, and they had not had children. So it's I don't know, kind of strange to me that like in the 3 years following, or like a 3-year period, they have several. He was given a prize of 1,000 francs and a royal income following the duel. And then he also becomes a bodyguard to the king, which is a role that comes with like really great social status and impressive income. And the young king that we see sort of sank into insanity, and he played a role in sort of helping to sort of navigate that. There's this story of how he sort of helps to stop a very bad situation in which the king was like trying to go kill some people because he was losing his grip on reality. But then Carouge does go on a crusade against the Turks in 1396, and he dies on September 25th of 1396 in the Battle of, I think, Nicopolis. I'm probably saying that wrong. So he doesn't live that much past the duel. He is in his 60s when he dies, we think. It's not known exactly when he was born, so ages are difficult. Jacques Legris, on the other hand, has a very similar in many ways upbringing. He's also born in the 1330s in Normandy, France. We also don't know exactly when he was born. And he also is a French squire and a knight who is remembered for this duel. Obviously, he didn't get a chance to do anything after the duel because he was dead. He was the son of a minor Norman squire. What's interesting about Legris, what sort of sets him apart, is that he was very well educated. He takes minor orders in the church. As we hear in the film, he is technically a clergyman. And he, again, like we see in the movie, could read Latin. He could read it so that he could do mass. But he eventually ends up not really going into the church, not going down that route. He's described as being large and physically imposing and a womanizer. And it's very funny because the moment, I was reading this book by Eric Chagger, also called The Last Duel, that this is based on. And the first time it describes him, it's like he was large and physically imposing. And I had a good giggle to myself being like, oh, that's why they cast Adam Driver. I remember I literally like went and took pictures of the line and like sent it to a friend of mine. And it was like this. They said, we know who we need for this. But he did fight in several smaller military campaigns. Wasn't known as a bad soldier or anything like that, but he didn't distinguish himself in the way that Carouge did. Now, where he did really excel was in the court. He married and had several sons, though very little is known about this family of his, but that's how there are like descendants of Legris. I think it's interesting that that is like one of the few things in the film that they sort of, from his actual life, don't include. Is the fact that like he, at the point that he's doing all this, he's married with kids. While he's out here chasing Marguerite. Obviously, there's not really much that can like make what he did worse, but I do think it's interesting that they don't really portray that. But I think it's probably like a we didn't have time for it type thing. In 1370, he's given a castle, and he really, after Pierre's brother dies and Pierre comes to this position of count, starts to rise in the court. Pierre really likes him. He becomes this very important man at court. Partially, this is due to his intelligence, to the fact that he can read and write really well. He's rewarded with all these lands and titles because he's one of Pierre's favorites, including the title of Royal Steward to Charles VI, which is like a mostly honorary title from what I can tell, but a very important one. Now, obviously, he dies during the duel on December 29th in 1386. He's about 56 years of age, we think, at the time. People ever since, as I said earlier, have defended his innocence, including some of his descendants, like, were very determined to sort of, like, prove that he was innocent, and that the theory either goes that Marguerite was wrong, it was someone else who did it, it wasn't him. That's interesting. Some people say that she was sort of put up to it by Carouge. Carouge wanted to get revenge on Jacques Legris, so he says, we're going to make up this made-up charge. You're going to go through with it. People at the time say, like, it was a dream she had. One of the things that Eric Jagger presents in his book that I think is one of the pieces of most compelling evidence of the fact that she's right, other than the fact that Legris' own lawyer basically says that he thinks that he's guilty, which, you know, is the fact that several people pointed out at the time, have pointed out since, it would be very risky for her to accuse both Jacques Legris and Adam Louvel of their involvement in this if it were not true. Because while one man might have a difficult time providing an alibi, it's going to be even harder for two men to provide an alibi that they weren't both there. And if either one of them had been able to solidly prove that they were not there, this case probably would have fallen apart while it was still in court and not gotten to the duel. But the fact that she involves both men is a pretty, that would be a pretty ballsy thing to do had it been made up. And not just ballsy, but like dumb. There was a legal study in the 2000s by French jurists who concluded that he was most likely guilty. Obviously, we will never know for sure, because this happened hundreds of years ago, but these like French legal experts concluded that he probably was. That's the same conclusion that Eric Jagger comes to in his book, and it's also what the film depicts. And I think it's very important that the film portrays this as sort of the absolute truth. It's not like, here's three different perspectives on it. It's, here's three different perspectives on it, and this is the one that is correct. So moving on to the correct perspective, Marguerite de Thibouville, I think is how you would say it, was born in 1362 at the Chateau de Fontaine-la-Sauret. She's the only daughter of Jean de Bois-Heroult and Robert de Thibouville, who was considered a traitor to the crown. Twice in like territorial conflicts, he'd sided against the king. Obviously, even though this was a very wealthy family, that, you know, they took a pretty significant hit to their social standing and their wealth and everything. So whenever she marries Carouge in 1380, it's meant to restore honor to the family. It's sort of seen that she's bringing the land and the wealth, and he's bringing the name. She's 18 years old at the time that she marries Carouge. He's about 50, somewhere in his 50s. Contemporaries described her as young, noble, wealthy, and also very beautiful. And that's a full quote there. She is said to be, really extremely good looking, and also just like really well liked by people who knew her. According to her own account, she is assaulted by Jacques Legris and Adam Louvel on January 18th, 1386, while her husband is in Paris, and her mother-in-law and the servants are in Saint-Pierre-sur-Dive. That's, sort of what we see in the movie as well. And it is true that had Carouge not won his duel, Marguerite would have been burned at the stake. We don't know, obviously, if she knew of this whenever she made the accusations or whenever she sort of went into this whole thing. But she certainly knew of it at some point in the trial. She gave birth to a son named Robert after her father shortly before the duel happened. What happened to her after her husband's death is actually unknown. There were stories by people who believed that Jacques Legris was innocent, that she later in life either like realized that she had been wrong and it hadn't been him, or just consumed by guilt over a false accusation. sort of shut herself up in a convent to atone for it. There's no evidence of that. So it's as with many women of the time, details of her life are hazy. A few other things I want to share sort of about historical accuracies in this movie. Jagger, who wrote the book that it's based on, was actually consulted on the script for the film and apparently did do some rephrasing of things to make them sound more period. I don't know how he did not catch that "I'm broke" line, but maybe he thought it would be funny. It is funny, actually. The section on Marguerite written by Nicole Holofcener is definitely the one that takes the most liberties with the historical record. And that's just, I think, because very little survives about Marguerite. We don't know as much about her as we do about Jacques Legrand and Jean de Bruges, but with the time period that this takes place in, we don't know that much about any of them, particularly in terms of more about their personalities, what they would have thought of these things. So I think that the liberties that they take with her and with the character of Pierre, I think, are completely understandable. As a scene in the film, I think this is a fascinating thing. People at the time believed that women couldn't conceive unless they were enjoying sex. Let me put it that way. Which I think is fascinating. This is, important because I think if this whole affair had happened later, the fact that she was pregnant at the time after not being able to get pregnant with her husband for many years might have been seen as proof that this child was not his, but was Jacques Legree's, and could have sort of been used as evidence of the assault having happened. But at the time, they did believe that a child could not come from an assault, that a woman could not get pregnant.
One of the few times we should be thankful for lacking sex education.
Right. Which it's also just that's such an interesting concept. And in many ways, I'm God, I wish that's how biology worked. That would make a lot of women's lives easier, wouldn't it? But yeah. So that's why nobody at the time really thought that maybe this baby that she was pregnant with was not Carouge's. Although I do think it's an interesting thing to sort of think about. The film, though, really is, I think, much more so than a lot of other period dramas, particularly set in this period, fairly historically accurate and really has adhered particularly to the book that it is based on, other than the fact that they cut down some on just how much you have to go through to get from proposing a duel, challenging someone to a duel, I guess that's the right terminology, to actually having the duel. Who knew how much paperwork was involved in that process? But Maggie, I know you're going to tell us a little bit more about the duel itself.
I am indeed, and it's nowhere near as thorough as your introduction to the three players of the story. But it is a nice little, I guess, Cliff Notes version of how the duels functioned. So in French law, noblemen could appeal their cause to the king and then challenge the accused to a judicial duel or trial by combat. This was often known as a judgment of God because they believed whomever the victor was had been protected by God and was then ultimately divinely ordained. And the outcome was proven by God if the courts were unable to prove it, which is just so interesting. Cases had to meet 4 requirements, which included very exhausting legal remedies and confirming that the crime had actually occurred. And like Nicole just joked, lots of paperwork. You could not just run out into the streets and challenge someone to a duel. It had to be all very legally done. Duels like these were actually becoming increasingly rare by the late 14th century, and we see a little bit of that in the film where the king's I don't know about this. I don't know if we want to go through with this, because it had been quite a while since a duel like this had been proposed. At that time, lawyers used the prospect of a duel as an incentive to actually get people to settle their cases outside of the court or even in court. because really it was just a hassle for everyone. Like nobody wanted to fill out all the paperwork and do all of the work required to do a duel. So usually that threat would get people to be like, oh, fine, I'm guilty. How much do I owe you? Which I just think is hilarious. And also
I love that. That's actually so funny.
So much. I wish we could like more often be like, hey, say you're guilty or we're gonna duel in the streets at the courthouse. The threat of violence always works. But oddly enough, and I thought this was quite interesting, most duels did not result in a death. It was actually somewhat rare. Oftentimes the two opponents would levy some blows towards each other. They'd get a little damage in and then would be like, okay, enough of this. I'll figure out, like, we'll solve this another way. Or even the king would intercede and be like, okay, you've had your moments, the verdict is clear. Like it was very rare for someone to die. So this particular duel occurred on December 29th, 1386. Honestly, Ridley Scott should have released his movie on December 28th. Like would have been such a great timing, but
that would have been Disney's so fault. Cool.
Would have been so
oh
cool,
god, if only.
That's Disney's fault. So that's the duel occurred in 1386 and was France's first trial by combat for a rape case in more than 30 years. So the reaction on screen is very much accurate. Like the king, I don't think, was even born the last time this had occurred. So the duel actually took place on foot, not on horseback, based on several different accounts. Legris was the first one to deliver a blow, much like we see in the film. He stabs Jean in the thigh. After Legris was already dead, they dragged him to the gallows and hung him to really seal his fate as a bad person. And that's basically how it went. There's a couple different accounts from people. They all seem to suggest the same things occurred. I did find a couple different scholars who had written their theses, I think it is.
Dissertations.
Dissertations. There we go. Gonna borrow.
It's a nicer plural. Yeah.
So they wrote their dissertations on judicial duels, and there were a few of them that actually differed with how Jaeger presented the accounts, just in minor ways, but also in larger ways. I guess, having not read the book, he presents it as a very drawn out, long battle, and it apparently was not. Most of the actual first-hand accounts of the incident said that it happened very quickly and was kind of disappointing, because everybody was probably like expecting like a gladiatorial battle, not to reference another Ridley Scott movie, and they did not get one. They got a very quick two guys brawling in their armor, one of them getting tipped over because his armor weighed too much, and then ultimately meeting his demise because of that. I mean, that's, the way that the duel is presented in the movie is very epic and very grand, very much based after what's written in the book. But one of the accounts from someone who was in the crowd basically said that Legris died because his armor was too heavy for him to get back up once he fell over. And so Jean very easily just stabbed him in the neck and moved on with his life.
That's incredible. I will say one of my favorite parts of the book, which also I do actually really recommend this book. It's a very easy read. But he does go into sort of describing all the different armor and all the different weapons that you would wear for a duel like this. And I'm honestly amazed that anybody managed to do anything.
But apparently that's the thing. They didn't even have all of those weapons. The weapons that Jaeger explains is just what people could have used, but they didn't have those weapons. Which I thought was interesting. Typical man trying to make it seem like a much bigger event. Oh my god, they had all these weapons, but apparently they didn't. It was two blades, which I think is hilarious. And this is the person who wrote their dissertation on this and went through all these different accounts of it. And I was just oh, that's kind of hilarious that it was not as epic or grand. It was kind of just And I just think it's hilarious. Like the idea, like if this had gone for a campier route, just the idea of like Adam Driver being weighed down by his massive armor and not being able to get back up.
I do think though, it's
tremendous.
whenever you put it into the context of the fact that like Matt Damon's like the right age to be playing this role, right? Adam Driver is about 10 years too young. At least for the role. But here's two men in their like 50s, 60s.
Just squabbling.
And whatever you think about, though, one of these guys is this like pampered, intelligent courtier, basically. And one of them's this soldier who frequently goes to war. Now I wonder who's gonna win this duel.
There's no doubt in my mind. And that's why like the accounts where it's like, yeah, he got stabbed in the thigh and he just kept going like it was nothing. Kept moving. And I was like that and just the idea, because like he lucked out because like thigh stabs, you have a main artery right there. Like he was very much lucky that he did not bleed out. And they kind of showed that a little bit in the movie with Marguerite's reaction to him getting stabbed. Because like I think even if you don't have a really good grasp of like bodily anatomy, I was going to say autonomy, but also that bodily anatomy. Why do I keep saying bodily before that? Obviously, I just really want to talk about bodily autonomy, but I'm trying to say anatomy. Even if you don't really fully understand anatomy, I think that you have a grasp that, like, if you put too much pressure on certain spots on your thigh, you start to get a little dizzy. So you probably know that something down there is kind of vital for the rest of your body. So just the way that she reacts to him getting stabbed, after I think Legris already has at least one hit to him as well, at least because they're on the horses doing their little jousting. And that was a little unnecessary with the horses getting killed. Way too many horses died in this. Yeah. And I was like, you do not need to show me horse weighing and then kill all the horses.
I feel like too, though, if you think about a man like, and Legris had been a soldier before too. It's not like he's completely doesn't know what he's doing, but Carouge is a guy who's like a really good soldier. He probably knows exactly where he needs to hit Legris to actually do some damage. Like he might have known that he needed to make that hit to the thigh like an inch over, and Legris like somehow manages to miss the place that would have actually, done something. Yeah. But I think it's just funny whenever you think about the idea that like they're fighting this duel because supposedly like whoever's right, God will make them win. And it's like, okay, but one of these men is like a really successful soldier. One of them isn't. Like, yeah, I wonder who's gonna win now.
Yeah, and I felt like in part I think Ridley Scott intentionally tried to avoid that question by ensuring that we see them on the battlefield together, so that we have this idea that they are at least both soldiers to some extent. And I thought that was smart, because when I was reading more about Legris, I was like, oh man, he was not trained to fight somebody like Jean. But I think it ultimately worked to show who they each were and what their capabilities were on the battlefield. And I think it's funny looking at the two of them, because like I think Adam Driver could take Matt Damon any day, anytime. Just like throw him over his shoulder.
Okay, truly, I was like, I don't know that I'm believing this. No, like I had to remind myself, like, okay, all right, if Matt Damon is supposedly a soldier, like he's used to this.
All they had to tell me was that just flip Adam Driver over and he's like a turtle. He can't get back up. Yeah. And I believe you. Like, I've seen the armor.
I saw this with my mom though, and I've gotta add that during like the beginning of that duel scene, she afterwards she told me that she was like, obviously I wanted Carouge to win so that Marguerite wouldn't get burned at the stake. But I also wanted to see Adam Driver kill Matt Damon. I was like,
didn't we
too, Mom? Me too.
Didn't we all? Yes.
Yep. That would have been enjoyable, shall I say?
Yeah, definitely. So there really is no easy segue to move into costumes. And again, not a lot to talk about.
Sure there is. Armor. We're talking about armor.
Okay, there we go. That's a natural segue. Yeah. Yes. Okay, so the costumes for The Last Duel were crafted by British costume designer Janty Yates, who also collaborated with Ridley Scott on The House of Gucci the same year. She's also slated to work on Gladiator, which I'm very excited about. She also worked on the film Charlotte Gray, which we have previously discussed. I was like, I think I recognize that name. And she does seem like she's worked with Ridley quite a few times. As beautiful as everything is, there are a lot of anachronistic elements to the costuming. It seems like things were focused much more on shapes, textures, and styles that appealed to the picture that they were trying to achieve, and I can't fault them for that. I definitely have seen a few historic costume blogs that I follow being very disappointed in the costumes in this, and I think, honestly, comparing it to some of the other kind of contemporary films that I've seen, this is actually probably the least egregious. Like, the costumes work. Nothing took me out of the moment.
I feel like there's something that feels like distinctly of a different period. And that's like my biggest gripe with like anachronistic costuming is whenever it's like, okay, well, this is set in the Regency era and you've given me like solidly Victorian clothing. Whereas this just feels like an artistic interpretation.
Yes. And I think part of that is credited to Ridley Scott having a much more desaturated palette. I often find myself being really perturbed by costumes that are far too elaborate or too bright or just really, jarring in comparison to some of the other costuming pieces. And so I think that's what kind of helps save that from happening in this film. So it's actually interesting. I found an interview with the cinematographer and the costume designer where they were talking about the fact that Ridley Scott kind of favors this more monochromatic palette. And the cinematographer talked a little bit kind of jesting about how it drove Yates a little crazy. And he also talked about how so many of the fabrics that she found had these really rich colors and fine pattern textures. And then she would say, if you take all that color out, no one will see it, which honestly is such a mood for anyone who does costuming, because so much of the stuff when you're creating scenes and creating shapes and just everything is so hinged upon the costume colors and the fabrics and all of this stuff. And so to lose some of that detailing, it has to be very heart-wrenching. And I think it's really interesting because the choices that she ends up making really do work with that desaturated pattern or this desaturated palette, I should say. I did find another really funny quote. I think it was in the same interview. I've lost track of where it came from, but it was Yates talking about the scene where Adam's character is wearing that big shawl thing around his shoulders. And it was something about the way they wanted an over-the-shoulder shot to be. Usually when you do over-the-shoulder shots, you try to blur out the foreground. That's not the focus. But something about the texture of this particular shawl thing that he had around them, they decided to actually keep in the focus because it helped with whatever like feeling or texture that they were trying to create. And I thought this was funny because I knew you would appreciate this, Nicole. But she said that even Adam, who has strong opinions about his costumes, loved it. And I just love the idea of Adam being like, I don't know about that. Maybe that'll work. I'm like, truly, this man played a Gucci and now he's like, I know everything about fashion.
I want to know every thought Adam Driver has ever had about a Kylo Ren costume now.
Oh, I know there's interviews where he's like he has a lot of feelings about it. But honestly, if we're talking about Kylo Ren very briefly, I would love to know what he thinks about the fact that we regressed on the helmet. Anyway, I will die mad about this. And this is not a Star Wars podcast. So I'm going to go back to talking about The Last Duel and not The Last Jedi. Very difficult. Thank you. It's really, I worked really hard on that segue. So to go back to something we talked about at the very top of this episode, we talked about the mullet. Party in the back, all sorts of things going on there. So I found a quote from your soulmate where he said, my character went to war constantly. He wanted to fight and Ridley liked the idea of a mullet, as if I just took my knife and cut the sides of my hair just so I could get my helmet on.
What?
That's where the mullet came from. I don't believe that. Like, I'm so sorry, Ridley Scott, if you ever listen to this, but I think your actor is lying on your name. I feel like that's a Matt Damon thing. I feel like Matt Damon decided this. Matt Damon was like, yeah, I totally want to have a mullet. But unfortunately, Adam Driver's hair is also anachronistic. Like, it looks fantastic. I love his flowing locks. Never tame them. There's no reason to tame them. But men in the late 14th century in France were sporting a page boy cut. So if you could just picture all these men with like nice little page boy, I'm a little lad haircuts. Berries and cream. Berries and cream.
Okay.
Berries and cream.
The thing is, I'm so glad they didn't do that because I could not have taken Adam Driver seriously in that role with that haircut.
I don't know which is worse, the idea of Adam Driver with a page boy haircut or Baldo Ren. Like, I don't know which is worse.
I don't know.
But
the page boy, something about the page boy combined with this role just would have been too much for me.
You would not have had the sex appeal.
No,
necessary.
I also don't know that I could be afraid of someone with a page boy haircut.
No, and honestly, if we had gotten page boy Adam Driver, we would have just gotten TikToks of "I'm a little lad."
Oh, absolutely. Which, I mean, I would have enjoyed those, but
I would have enjoyed those too.
It feels like any scene he was trying to be like menacing in, though. I'd just be like, "Rawr!"
Truly. Imagine this giant man with a page boy haircut.
I don't want
Can't be me. Can't be me. But speaking of hair, Jodie Comer's hair is largely okay. This film commits my cardinal sin of historic films with women and their hair down. Like, they just did not wear their hair down. And as somebody who has long hair but never wears her hair down, it's just not conducive to life to just have hair like hanging down, blowing all over the place, doing stuff. It's not accurate, but they do a couple really nice braids, which are very historically accurate. In fact, there are hairstyles of women in the 14th century that have been depicted in statues that very closely resemble the fashion that they have her wearing in this film. So that works really well. But I'm begging costumers, or not costumers in this case, but I'm begging hair and makeup, please stop making women wear their hair down in historical films. It is not accurate unless they're going to bed and then they're going to plait their hair and go to bed. They're not going to sleep with their hair all over the place because it's just not safe.
Well, I also just want to like ask all these, hair designers who do this, like, all right, so do you know how often these women are washing their hair? Now let's talk about what it would look like if they left it down like that. Like,
it's never going to be silky and beautiful and all of that fun stuff. It's going to look terrible.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to style them all like Severus Snape, then like go for it, I guess. But
oh God,
let's
can you imagine?
That would be a mood.
It would be truly a mood.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us in our 39th episode about The Last Duel, which is now available to watch on HBO Max. Thank you to everyone listening and also to Maggie for humoring me in doing an episode about this movie.
I'm so happy to be here. So we would love to hear from you on our social media and to hear what you think of The Last Duel. Which Ridley Scott film of 2021 is your favorite?
You can let us know on social media at HGATM Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find Maggie over at Maggie of the Town, and you can find me at Nicole Ackman 16.
Yes, you can find me on my newly verified Twitter account.
So fancy.
So fancy. Look at us. You can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the Earglue Media website, Audible. If you like what you hear, don't forget to leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or over on Podchaser or on Spotify, which now allows you to rate and review podcasts. And then, of course, every few episodes, we'll be reading our reviews, so be sure to leave us one if you would like to be featured.
We'll be back soon with another episode as we continue to look at period films from a history and film perspective.
Until next time.
You've been listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies. This is actually the follow-up, Maggie, to that like astrology quiz thing that we took that said that Matt Damon and I were a
wasn't going to bring that up. I thought that was going to be like our bumper at the end of the episode where I was going to be like, the audience doesn't know that Matt Damon is your soulmate.
Oh God. Yeah. Well, now they know.
What is happening?
What?
Oh, I kept getting highlighted and unhighlighted.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. I was like, I'm not sure what's happening to my Word
I forgot that you can see that. I was trying to keep track of where we are.
I was like, what is happening? I'm so sorry.
I forgot that it shows up for the other person. I'm sorry. That's my fault.
Okay, no, that just made me die because I was like, I think it's having a conniption fit.
You're like the ghost of Jacques Legree.
I know. I was like, oh no. I seriously did. I was like, is the ghost trying to tell me something?
The ghost is like, how dare you say that I didn't know where to stab someone?
I'm so sorry, sir. Wow. I know this is definitely going on to the bumper. I am afraid. Anyways.